Greetings, friends. You are watching Ruslan Belov's channel, and today we will analyze in detail the situation in Ukraine as of February 6, 2026. Over the past 24 hours, several extremely significant events have occurred at once, so without further ado, let's move directly to the analysis. First of all, it is worth noting that for the second day in a row, pro-Ukrainian, neutral, and predominantly pro-Western analysts have been recording a sharp drop in the offensive activity of Russian units along almost the entire line of contact. According to these sources, the decrease in combat activity is particularly noticeable in at least three separate sectors of the front. The first of these is the Ternov direction. We are talking about the settlement of Ternovate, located in the eastern Zaporizhzhia sector. I would like to remind you that just a few days ago, Russian units managed to improve their tactical position in this area. However, today, according to expert reports, the intensity of offensive actions here has sharply declined. The next sector is the Borova direction. The same pro-Ukrainian and neutral analysts, citing open-source data, claim that the Russian Federation has significantly reduced both the number of attempts to advance and the total number of assault actions in this sector. Some neutral and pro-Ukrainian experts directly link this decrease in activity to the recent shutdown of Starlink terminals in territories under the control of the Russian army. Approximately an hour or an hour and a half after the first reports appeared, similar information came from the Konstantinovka direction. Here, the situation is described using almost the same terminology. Pro-Western and neutral experts claim that in the area of Konstantinovka, as well as on the outskirts of the city, the Russian army has noticeably reduced the number of offensive operations. This is especially true of attacks from the direction of Chasiv Yar. To reiterate, pro-Ukrainian, neutral and pro-Western analysts, mappers and OSINT specialists link such a sharp drop in the activity of Russian troops, specifically to the shutdown of Starlink terminals. At the same time, one cannot completely rule out an alternative option. Such behavior by the Russian Federation may be an element of a tactical maneuver aimed at disorienting and misleading the Ukrainian military command. At the moment, it is extremely difficult to draw definitive conclusions. However, in the next few days, the overall picture will become clearer. Another extremely important piece of news, which at first glance has no direct connection to either the Starlink shutdown or the decrease in combat activity, came from the capital of the Russian Federation, Moscow. From early this morning, it became known about an assassination attempt on the first Deputy Chief of Intelligence, General Alexeyev. According to available information, he was shot in the back. He is currently in critical condition, and doctors are fighting for his life. As of now, no official charges have been brought, and no public theories have been voiced. The investigative authorities are apparently continuing to conduct operational and special measures. More detailed information will likely appear closer to the end of the day, so it is currently extremely difficult to draw any conclusions or identify those potentially involved. However, the fact itself commands serious attention, especially considering that just the day before, representatives of this department took part in negotiations in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. We will continue to closely monitor the development of this story, as well as whether the shutdown of Starlink terminals will indeed have such a serious impact. For now, on the second day, it is quite difficult to assess the overall effect of this factor on the situation at the front. Now let's move on to the topic of strikes on Ukrainian territory. Almost all experts without exception, both pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian, agree that in the near future, namely within the next 48 hours, the Russian Federation may launch another massive strike on Ukrainian energy infrastructure objects. Speaking of the past 24 hours, it seems that such a strike has already been delivered, and a fairly powerful one at that. However, it received very little coverage in the media and Telegram channels. Since early morning, pro-Ukrainian sources began publishing a map showing only a specific fragment of this massive strike. This is not the full picture, but only one episode of an operation that started at approximately 6 p.m. on February 5th and ended only by noon on February 6th. In these materials, one can see several yellow routes indicating the movement of a large number of Russian reconnaissance drones, as well as several strike directions toward the settlement of Kropivnitsky. Information later emerged that a combined strike was delivered against Kropivnitsky using both unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles, including Kinjal-type hypersonic missiles. Currently, as of the end of February 6th, no detailed information has been received as to exactly which objects were targeted and whether the set goals were achieved. Nevertheless, the fact of the strike itself is not in doubt. Sometime later, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine published official statistics regarding the number of Russian air attack assets used. According to this data, in the period from 18 hours to 12 hours the following day, a total of 335 air targets were deployed, including drones and missiles. This included 2 Kinjal aeroballistic missiles and 5 Kh-59-69 missiles, as well as an extremely large number of unmanned aircraft. According to the published statistics, a significant portion of the drones was intercepted and destroyed by air defense systems. However, to repeat, throughout the day there were very few reports in the information space regarding specific strike areas and drone flight paths, so objective information is currently quite insufficient. All these strikes, the rising tension, and the general escalation of the situation are taking place against the background of the essentially failed negotiations that took place in the United Arab Emirates the day before. The American side claims that only one unresolved issue remains between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, the territorial one. However, today Sergei Lavrov stated in an interview that there are actually significantly more disputed topics. According to him, it is not just about territorial issues, but also about the possibility of Western troops being present on Ukrainian territory, language policy, religious issues, as well as a whole range of other, less public but no less significant problems. Thus, it can be concluded that the negotiation process has reached another deadlock. The Russian Federation insists on territorial concessions from Ukraine. The Ukrainian side, in turn, according to some experts, may be ready to consider such concessions in exchange for the deployment of a European military contingent after the conclusion of the conflict, which should act as a security guarantor. Moscow categorically rejects such a scenario and does not agree to the presence of foreign troops on Ukrainian territory. As a result, neither side is ready to compromise. According to a number of analysts, this is why both sides have already begun active preparations for a summer military campaign, which could potentially become the decisive and perhaps even the final phase of the conflict. We will continue to monitor the development of events. Meanwhile, an extremely difficult situation with electricity and heat supply is unfolding in Kyiv. Today, an interactive map was published on which the areas of the capital experiencing serious problems with heat supply are highlighted in blue. Previously, these quarters were supplied by the Kyiv TPP-4. Also today, footage of TPP-4 itself appeared. Judging by the published images, the facility is completely destroyed and apparently cannot be restored. The situation is assessed as critical, yet despite what is happening, the parties still do not demonstrate a readiness to make concessions. Now let's analyze in detail the situation directly along the line of contact. I must emphasize once again, the reasons remain not fully understood for now, but for the second day in a row, we are receiving almost no reports of any significant or large-scale changes to the line of contact in favor of either side. Let's start with the Sumy direction. Certain movements are being recorded here, which by all appearances are archival in nature. However, they were mapped only today. First and foremost, it is worth noting the publication of video footage from the area of the settlement of Trostyanets. According to the author, these frames capture a railway echelon that arrived at the settlement for unloading, presumably carrying military equipment. According to the source, the Russian side launched a massive strike on this echelon. As a result of the attack, the train along with the equipment was completely destroyed. This strike was delivered within the Russian offensive zone southeast of the city of Sumy. In connection with this, map adjustments appeared for this direction today. However, it is important to emphasize that we are not talking about new advances. All information regarding the progress of Russian units in this sector had been previously published by various mapping resources. Today, only a more reliable confirmation occurred, after which the corresponding areas were shaded on the map. According to a number of experts, Russian units managed to advance in the area of the settlement of Ryasna, south of Grabovsky. These are the specific changes being recorded in this sector. Furthermore, according to reports from the North Troop Grouping, the Russian army was able to significantly improve its positions in the area of the settlement of Popivka. Based on this data, as well as official reports from the Ministry of Defense and information from the North Grouping, the corresponding map adjustment was made. Also today, information about the advancement of Russian units in the area of the settlement of Pokrovka was indirectly confirmed once again. Thus, it can be observed that the offensive in this sector is developing quite actively, with the Russian army advancing westward toward Krasnopilya. Over the past 24 hours or several days, attempts to transfer Ukrainian units as close as possible to the front line have been recorded. Massive drone strikes were regularly carried out against railway echelons. If we look at the dynamics of updates since the beginning of February, a very large amount of video material has been coming specifically from this direction. In them, one can observe how the battle formations of the armed forces of Ukraine are gradually being organized, which are then regularly targeted by airstrikes, drone strikes, and other types of fire. This allows us to conclude that the Ukrainian side is accumulating forces in this sector. However, such a concentration may be directly related to the active advancement of the Russian army towards Sumy. We previously discussed the Kharkiv direction. Information regarding the formation of certain strike groups continues to come from this sector. It is also worth reminding that over recent weeks, mutual strikes along the Kharkiv-Belgorod line have been occurring regularly. Today it became known that on the night of February 6th, the Ukrainian side launched another strike on substations in the Belgorod area. According to sources, up to 5 explosions were recorded, presumably as a result of the use of HIMARS rockets. In the published video footage, one can see the moments of the arrivals and the strikes themselves. Presumably, the strikes were aimed at an area near a power station or a railway depot. A large number of explosions were recorded. However, as can be noticed, the attack was not followed by a total blackout. This suggests that in this case, the target of the strike was not an energy infrastructure facility, but likely some sort of military objective. On the part of the Russian Federation, the offensive along the Volchya River continues. We discussed yesterday that Russian units are concluding combat operations for a large forest massif located south of the settlement of Marino. Aviation is being actively utilized in this area. Just the day before, a suggestion was made that the next stage would be an advance toward the next large forest massif, and these expectations have generally been confirmed. The first video materials confirming the start of combat operations for this sector have begun to appear online. A large number of airstrikes have been recorded. In the near future, the Russian side will likely attempt to consolidate its positions within the Seversko-Kordonsky forest massif. Next, we move to the Kupiansk direction. According to a number of experts, predominantly pro-Ukrainian and pro-Western, the intensity of combat operations in this sector has not decreased. On the contrary, clashes here remain quite active. However, despite the high intensity and the large volume of commentary, no new adjustments to the front line have been recorded. The line of contact in this sector remains unchanged. In the Sloviansk direction, the main combat operations are concentrated along the M03 highway. Today, a significant amount of geolocation material was received from this sector, but all of it, without exception, confirms the current front line. Ukrainian sources published video recordings of strikes on Russian army positions in the northern part of the settlement of Privolny. Based on these frames, no map adjustments are being made. The video material merely confirms the previously published reports of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation once again. A similar situation is observed in the area of the settlement of Novomarkovo. The Russian side published video materials recording the combat operations in this sector. Of the final frames of the video, several Russian servicemen can be seen raising flags in the northernmost part of the settlement. However, here too no new changes are made to the map. These video materials only confirm previously claimed positions. In the Konstantinovka direction, according to the assessment of several analysts, the pace of the Russian army's offensive has noticeably slowed down. Over the past 24 hours, a large number of videos were published, mostly dedicated to the work of Russian FPV drone operators against the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. These frames record the unloading of reinforcements arriving in Konstantinovka, which are immediately targeted by strikes. Also in the video materials, a piece of equipment can be seen that, by all appearances, managed to break through into the northern part of Konstantinovka, along with reinforcements. The Russian side is also attempting to strike this equipment. Overall, all combat operations in this direction are currently reduced primarily to the use of drones, without active advancement by ground units. Remarkable reports are coming from the Dobropilya direction. Pro-Ukrainian mapping resources have made small changes, according to which Russian units have likely managed to expand the grey zone to the west of the settlement of Dorozhny. Based on the current configuration, it can be assumed that the Russian army is making an attempt to bypass Belitske from the northern direction, with a subsequent exit to the northern outskirts of the settlement, which could be part of a plan for its complete encirclement. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, a decrease in the intensity of combat operations is recorded, while official comments from the Russian Federation have not yet been received. A small adjustment is noted in the northern part of the settlement of Zaliznichne. Video materials were published by the Ukrainian side showing strikes on the forward positions of Russian units in the northern part of the town. Based on these frames, a map adjustment was made for the past 24 hours. Based on the available information, it can be assumed that at the moment the Russian army is trying to break through the defense of the armed forces of Ukraine in the northern part of this settlement and consolidate on the reached boundaries. There is a high probability that combat operations for this settlement may conclude in the near future. However, the outcome will depend on a variety of factors. It is also worth noting that starting tomorrow, weather conditions across the entire territory of Ukraine will again begin to deteriorate significantly. According to a number of analysts, within the next 48 hours, the Russian Federation may repeat a massive strike on energy infrastructure facilities. After this, it will become clearer what the general trends of the situation are, what state the negotiation process is in, and whether the parties have indeed moved to active preparations for a summer military campaign. We will conclude on this note, friends. Thank you for staying with the channel. Subscribe, support the episode with likes, and all the best to you.